Hi, everyone. Happy Saturday. Hope everyone's having a wonderful weekend so far. We're here with St. Gibson.
Hi, everyone. So happy to be here.
Welcome to Sapph-Lit. We read A Dowry of Blood for our October fiction pick, and this was one of, I think, the most talked about books that we've read so far. We received a ton of new members in October, and everyone was so excited to read this. I feel like we're kind of all reliving our Twilight middle school, high school eras
Oh,
through
it's the Vampire Renaissance.
Absolutely. So I read it in a day. I loved it. My three best friends also read it and helped me compile a bunch of questions for you. So gonna intro you and then let's get right into it.
Okay.
So everyone, this is St. Gibson. She is a literary agent, author, and village wise woman in training, a graduate of the creative writing program at the University of North Carolina in Asheville and the theological studies program at Princeton Seminary. She currently lives in Boston with her partner, spoiled Persian cat, and vintage blazer collection. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited.
I'm from Boston, so
Oh, that's great. I live
I
in
love
Brookline.
talking to, oh, God, my brother lives in Somerville. My parents are in
Oh, yeah.
Framingham. Yeah. I love talking to a fellow New Englander. I feel like there's just like this kind of unspoken like bullshit thing that
Yeah.
others have. But first of all, congratulations on your formal publishing debut.
Thank
I
you so much.
know that A Dowry of Blood was originally self-published and got picked up by Orbit to go through the traditional publishing trajectory. So can you share a bit of what that journey has been like for you and how that has changed your opinion on or view on self-publishing?
Yeah, so I'm a hybrid author, meaning that some of my work is self-published and some of my work is traditionally published. And it's been just like this roller coaster, just like this amazing journey with Dowry. Originally, what happened was I wrote a short story for a queer Gothic anthology through a very small press in the UK. And the editor reached out to me and she was like, "Hey, I love this story. If you ever want to do a novelization, like let me know." And I was like, "That sounds pretty good." So I ended up working with this editor to Indie Pub, A Dowry of Blood, like 2 years ago. And word of mouth is amazing. The book just kind of struck like lightning. I'm still completely blown away by the response that it had on like TikTok and Bookstagram and things like that. And then my agent called me up one day and was like, "Hey, you have an offer from Orbit. Do you want to work with them?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do." So it's phenomenal. I don't think it's really changed my opinion on indie pubbing so much, except that I really do believe that like for some authors, hybrid publishing can be the best of both worlds. Because with traditional publishing, you have a lot of support. You don't have to do everything yourself. You're not responsible for every little detail. There's a bigger marketing budget. There's just like more access to resources, and just like more visibility. But with indie pubbing, you do have like all of the control. So you really get to decide your timeline, your cover design, your audiobook narrator, like, and you also get like a higher amount of the royalties. So it's like, it can be, so I think going hybrid can be a really great option for people. And I've really enjoyed it. So it's just given me a newfound appreciation for what both kind of publishing paths can contribute to an author's career.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would love to hear a bit about the cover change as well, because that was something that in Sapph-Lit we were talking about. Like some people preferred the hybrid pubbed cover, some people preferred the brand new cover. Do you have a preference between the two? And what was that kind of like cover design journey like?
I love them both, but they're both very different covers that speak to different audiences. So Marlo Loon designed the original cover that is on the paperback that you can no longer get, the one that's out of stock. If you can find one third hand, you're very lucky. So they're kind of rare now, and it was so phenomenal working with them. They're just a spectacularly talented artist and are known for doing like really intense detail work, and doing art that's inspired by like the Victorian, the Edwardian period. So it was a really good fit. And I loved that. And then when Orbit picked it up, the way they pitched the new cover to me is they were like, "We love the original and we want to kind of honor that by using the same like figure of Constanza on the cover, but they really wanted to reach a wider audience, and like especially the historical fiction market readership, and also do kind of tap into that crossover between genre fiction and literary fiction, as useful as those terms are. And so I think that the new cover really does that. But I have both of them on my shelf. They live side by side. I love them both. But it was nice being able to work with Orbit on the new cover. It went through some changes. Like we wanted it to feel more, it felt a very modern initially. And so we were like, can we have like Gothic lettering? And like they were like, yeah, totally. So they have the beautiful linked O's. They did the Gothic lettering on the cover, and I think it looks really nice.
Yeah, it does for sure. Veronica has the original cover and I have the new cover. So we made sure to publish both in on the Sapph-Lit Instagram to like honor its history. But I'm now on the hunt for like that old cover so I can have both side by side on my shelf.
Yeah.
Um,
The Italian version has the old cover, but I don't think you speak Italian. Maybe
I,
not.
I actually do.
You do? Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, that's amazing. Yeah, the Italian version just came out like 7 days ago, like a week ago, and it has a reversible
hit up
cover.
my family in Italy and tell them to send me one. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
it's a hardcover, but it has the original art on it.
Beautiful. That's a hot tip. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But this book is written as a really long letter to,
Yeah.
he who shall not be named. What made you choose the style of a letter?
I wanted to kind of get outside my comfort zone a little bit and do something a little bit different. And I so I was a poet before I was a novelist. And so I come from poetry, and I really wanted to do something where the language was like prose poetry and like really, really dense language. Maybe not dense, because that sounds like it's not readable, but just like that beautiful purple prose that just like really makes use of language to the utmost. That was like the challenge I gave myself. And I also liked being able to break up the narrative and just maybe have like two sentences on one page and then a chapter and then like a paragraph. And I thought it just did a cool thing emotionally to the reader. But I read In the Dream House, which is a phenomenal book. In the Dream House is so good. And I was like, and In the Dream House is this like genre blending auto fiction, gothic, quasi memoir about abuse in a queer relationship between two queer women.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely gorgeous. And I read it and I was like, well, if In the Dream House can do this and be really experimental, then I can too. I think In the Dream House is like at the top of the pyramid of good literature. But I was like, I can try this, I can do this. So I think I saw an experimental format used other places. And so I was like, I can run with this letter idea I had. And I think I liked the idea of it being like a love letter and a confession at the same time, because I think a lot of times after a breakup, especially if the relationship was very fraught or if there was abuse involved, our feelings are they conflict so much, especially when you're very close to that separation and you haven't had a lot of time to heal yet. I think Constanza has had some time to heal, and she has that like almost dual perspective of being like, here's how I felt in the moment, but here's now what I know was actually happening. And I think a letter just really allowed me to explore that in a really interesting way.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you say that, because as a club, we have read In the Dream House. We read it last year as a
Oh,
non,
that's awesome.
and it's one of my favorite books of all time.
Me too.
And my therapist always tells me, like, write a letter to these people that you no longer have communication with, to these people that you didn't get to say everything that you wanted to say. And letter writing for me as like a form of journaling has been so healing. So I love that you kind of incorporated that into this. It's going to make me want to these author interviews always make me want to reread the book immediately. So yeah, I love that so much. And then another choice that you made was not saying Dracula's name, but also not revealing Constanta's birth name.
Mm-hmm.
So what was the reasoning behind both of those choices? And do you have a original birth name in mind for Constanta?
So with not naming Dracula, that was a very intentional choice from the beginning, because like the book is first person, but she addresses the Dracula as you, so it almost reads like second person. It's kind of like in this gray area in POV. And I was like, if I'm going to do this for a whole book, and I really need to commit to it, I need to have a reason for doing this. And part of it was just like, I felt kind of silly saying like Dracula, like, I don't know, like, because there's been so many versions of the story, and I really wanted to kind of do my own as much as possible. And like using that name just reminded me of like the Francis Ford Coppola movie and like, you know, all kinds of stuff like that. So it was a little bit of like an artistic finickiness where I was like, it doesn't feel right. Like, and I didn't want to rename him because that also didn't feel right. But then I was like, I think that this is Constanza's story, and it's about her reclaiming her agency from someone who took so much agency and power away from her when they were together. And I love, one of my favorite paragraphs in the book is the paragraph where she's like, you are what I say you are, and I say you do not have a name. And it's really her like reclaiming that power, because he took her name from her. I don't have a birth name in mind for Constanza. The way I kind of, and a lot of people have come to me and be like, I wish that she had like chosen a different name at the end. But kind of the way that I feel about the story is I feel like she grows into the name and makes it her own. Like she's like, this is, I've grown to love this name, and I'm going to take back my agency and say that this is my name, but I get to decide on what terms I get to use this name. And another little detail I like is that like the brides who are in this relationship have like pet names for each other. And so Alexei calls her Constance, and he calls Magdalena Maggie. And like Magdalena is always calling her like my darling. And like so the people who love her do have other names for her. And like I think that that also is very enriching to her experience of being seen and loved in a different way than Dracula, who is like, I'm going to call you this and put this on you, you know?
Yeah, it's like a kind of form of ownership and
Yeah,
relation and claiming like you don't exist if I did not name you.
exactly.
Yeah. Um, excuse me. What kind of research went into writing this book? Because like I'm a bit of a history nerd, a bit of an art history nerd, like Renaissance and all of that. And I feel like each city and place that they traveled to was, you know, defined by how the characters interpreted the settings, but you still painted such a detailed description of each place and historical, like with the plague, for example.
Yeah.
What made you choose these settings and the overall map of the countries and cities that they visited and lived in?
Yeah, I always say that one of my great principles in writing is to write towards joy and pleasure. Like, even if you are writing a really difficult scene or a book with really heavy themes, or if you're doing horror, if you're doing memoir, like there should still be points of joy and pleasure that you're pushing the narrative towards for you as a writer. And a pleasurable scene to write could be something really scary. Like, it doesn't need to be like happy, but I'm always like looking for those points of joy. And so when I was choosing the places that they traveled to in like this little like, I don't know, vampire family road trip that they go on, I chose places and settings that I was really interested in, that I would have loved to be able to see. Like, you know, going to I've always really wanted to go to Venice, and, you know, to go to 15th century Spain and Paris in the 20s, and to see Russia during a really fraught but very, very dynamic part in its history. They go to Berlin, and then what's the other one, the one that Vienna.
Yeah.
And I've always really wanted to go to Vienna ever since I was little. And so I chose places that I was really excited about, interested in. And then I chose periods of time that I thought would be a dynamic background. And I just researched that period. So I saved myself from getting a little bit too bogged down in like hundreds of years of history of Venice. I was just trying to figure out like what would people have worn to Carnival in this like 50-year period. And so I kind of focused on it that way. And a big inspiration for me for this was there's a German language musical called Elizabeth Das Musical, which is about Empress Elizabeth and the rise and fall of her empire along with her life. And it really explores like mental illness and family dynamics and the sense of legacy that she had as a ruler. But it's told through the backdrop of an empire that is crumbling. And it's also told through the lens of the figure of death being this beautiful young man who is in love with her, and death is following her and like through the crumbling empire. I thought this was the coolest thing ever when I saw it. It's my favorite musical. And so I was like, I think there's just something so thrilling and so textured about telling a story of a relationship crumbling when the empire you're in or the city you're in is under siege. So I wanted to kind of mirror, I chose moments of time that were very politically charged to mirror what was going on in the domestic life as well. So it was a mixture of just like places I thought would have been fun to visit if I had like one night in and I could time travel, and places that I thought would be a good backdrop for this domestic kind of war that's going on in the household.
Just hearing you talk about this just makes it so clear that this was such a passion project for you.
Yeah.
And that like you're incorporating all of these things that you love into this, like it seems so personal, but like when reading this, I was like, oh my God, this is my dream book as like a former twihard, like, well, not former, still twihard,
Oh, of
like
course, always.
still obsessed with sapphics and vampires. And I know just hearing you speak about it is it's so clear how passionate you are about it, and how personal it is for you. I love that you're saying like right towards joy, and that's definitely something that is kind of counter to the themes of the book.
Yeah.
And it does depict an abusive relationship over decades, like centuries. What made you want to rewrite the story of Dracula's bride to be a toxic, abusive relationship? And what was important for you to convey and include in this retelling?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm very interested, I think in all my work, I'm very interested in like very complex human relationships. I'm always talking about relationships almost as like a garden where something beautiful can grow and flourish. There can also be like thorns and weeds and toxins. And so it's like, I think of like relationship maintenance as like maintaining this garden in your life of all these different relationships and different kinds of plants. And sometimes I find it really interesting to read stories about, these different kinds of relationships with different kinds of plants that are very toxic. So I think I've always been in love with the Gothic, and the Gothic is a great genre to explore forbidden love or toxic relationships or family systems that are crumbling. Those are big themes in the genre. I did a lot of research into what a relationship like this might actually be like, because I wanted it, even though it's a fantasy and even though it's about vampires and you live forever and it's sexy and fun, I wanted it to feel the abuse to feel incredibly grounded in real life and feel like what it might actually have been like for someone in a relationship like that. So I read a lot of like psychological case studies of like domestic abuse and narcissism. I read Why Does He Do That, which is a really good book about abusive men. And it's written from a psychiatrist who works specifically, it's a male psychiatrist who specifically works with other men to try and rehabilitate them, and to deeply understand how this happens. And then in some cases to separate families where reconciliation is no longer possible. So that's like a really interesting book. I read that. And then I read books like In the Dream House that depict abusive relationships from a really personal perspective. And so it was really important to me that it felt, like I said, grounded and real, even though it's a fantasy world. And I think I love vampires, and I love the vampire lover trope, and I think it is really romantic and wonderful, but I also think it's kind of scary to be in a relationship with someone for all eternity, like, because when even I love and like I'm excited to get married, but like a marriage has an expiration date because you're not going to live forever. You know how much time you're investing into this person, which is the rest of your mortal life. But as a vampire, it's just forever. And what happens if this person that you married turns out to be a monster, but it's forever? That was kind of the big question that was in my head when I sat down to write Dowry. So I wanted to do something that was really gothic and really dramatic and the high highs and the low lows, but I wanted to root it in actual psychology and actual lived experiences of victims and survivors of domestic abuse.
Yeah, it's my gears are really turning because another book that we read as a community is called Open by Rachel Krantz. Have
Okay.
you heard
No,
of
I'm
it?
not familiar.
So it's a memoir of love, liberation, and non-monogamy, and it kind of leads into my next question. But she talks about her relationship with a man who introduced her to non-monogamy, but eventually it became a toxic, abusive relationship as well.
Right.
And if anyone's on the call and feels like there are parallels between Dowry of Blood and Open, please hit up my DMs because I need to talk about this. But this is also a story about polyamory and non-monogamy. And what do you hope the reader gets out of the relationship between Constanta, Magdalena, and Alexei specifically?
I just wanted there to be like sweetness and tenderness in all the darkness. Like I love the theme of people finding each other in really bad situations. And I think that's just like so beautiful. And I love stories that do that. And I love writing stories about that. And kind of like maybe not in this story the redemptive power of love, but the transformational power of love. And I think it was really important for Constanza's character arc as well, because like she starts to realize things are not going well with Dracula. She starts to realize she is being manipulated and lied to and being forced in situations she doesn't want to be in. And she tries to kind of find the courage and the power to leave herself, but it's really not until she sees Dracula start to mistreat Magdalena and Alexei that she's like, I am taking action because I love these people and they are precious to me and valuable. So I think that was really important for her character arc to have that moment where she's like, it's not just me anymore, it's these other two people that I love very dearly, and I don't want to I can't stand by and continue to allow this to happen. So that's kind of like her catalyst into change. But I really wanted the audience to see a depiction of non-monogamy that was complex. Like there's jealousy and there's, moments where there's arguments and Dracula kind of trying to pull them apart too and kind of being a manipulative little spider in this web. But ultimately, these are three people that are really committed to loving each other well and learning how to love each other well. And I think that that's just like it was for me a really lovely thing to write. And I hope that I hope that readers take away from this that whether a relationship is monogamous or non-monogamous, that like it takes being willing to learn how to care for someone. But that there's always an opportunity to find that sweetness and that tenderness even in really bad situations.
Yeah. I'm also thinking about like more early 2000s, mid 2010s depictions of vampires, and there's always like this, I was looking for my soulmate to spend eternity with, and I just was waiting for you 18-year-old girl, and I'm 200 years old.
I know.
But there's like this like soulmate kind of, you're the only one I ever want. But here it's kind of like love is not finite, and we're immortal, and there's so much love to give over our immortal lives. So that lends itself to polyamory. Do you feel like, I mean, this is kind of a stupid hypothetical, but do you feel like vampires should be polyamorous?
I think it makes sense. It's also like how, and you can write a straight vampire if you want.
No, they're gay.
Right, exactly. But I'm just like, you would live forever, and like being a vampire is such an embodied kind of monster. Like it's all about like sensuality and like it's voluptuousness and sensuality, and that's kind of part of the horror as well. And I'm just like, I do not believe that you would be a vampire for your whole eternity and not have experiences or fall in love with multiple people or people of different genders. Like the math is not mathing.
Math is not mathing.
So I do think that for me at least, vampires, it's always going to be polyamorous vampires. And like I've talked about this movie a lot because everyone knows who has spoken to me that I love this movie. One of my favorite vampire movies of all time is Van Helsing, 2004, with it's so good, with Richard Roxburgh playing Dracula, and the three brides are these three like beautiful women who are just chewing the scenery and just like doing the most. And the writers did, I think Stephen Summers directed, I'm not sure who wrote it, but the writers did some really interesting things with the vampire brides and their relationship with Dracula, they have like these little like domestic spats, and they're like flirting with each other, and they're like talking about wanting to have kids, and like it's very just like it's in this monster movie, this action movie, but it's like really interesting to me. And I remember being like 12 watching this and being like, I want to be in a vampire polycule. Like so
That's the
that
dream.
I ended up writing that in the future because I was just like so into these depictions that are a little bit more transgressive and expansive in the definition of love. The whole vampire soulmate trope is classic. The fated mates, we love to see it, but it's not my personal favorite. And so I kind of got to do the opposite of that on the total other side with Dowry, which is like, here are my many loves, you know?
Yeah. Oh my God, I love that. It's so I'm gonna skip forward a few questions to
Okay.
someone from our community named Michaela, and this is her question, and it's a little long, so bear with me.
That's fine. Go ahead.
I find it fascinating that every character in this family or coven is bisexual / attracted to both / all genders. Whenever I think of vampires or write my own vampires, I always make them all queer, because my philosophy is just that you cannot be alive for that long and not at least try something with the same gender. In your universe, did Dracula know he was queer all along, or only when he was faced with eternity? Same with Constanta. I think based on the narrative, Magdalena was always down for anything, queen, and Alexei knew he was queer when he was human and very young at that. I think the first mention of it for Constanta was the girl in Vienna, Hannah. Did Constanta feel this way about girls / women prior, or did this come after centuries of being with Dracula? And with Dracula, how much of his queerness / sexuality is actual attraction versus the need for easy / varying types of targets?
This is a really good question. Thank you, Michaela. This is a lovely layered question.
We're not done.
Oh, keep going, keep going.
I'm super curious what other types of men specifically he'd keep as husbands prior to Alexei, because between acquiring Constanta and then meeting Alexei, there weren't any other men as we know of. Long break. I know that's very long, very loaded question. So thank you for your time and to answer even a part of it. Love
Totally.
Michaela.
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. These are like really good, juicy questions you're giving me today. I'm having a wonderful time.
Oh, good. Me too.
Yeah, I think the read that Magdalena and Alexei both knew that they were bisexual or pansexual pretty much the whole time is fair. Magdalena, she is in a position as a woman where she has to live under patriarchy, but she does have a little bit of leeway because she's quite powerful as a woman and she's very wealthy and very well connected. So she can kind of act on that a little bit more and kind of experiment and find out what she's interested in. And I think she's always been very interested in women as well as men. I think Magdalena is probably more like a Kinsey, like 4 or 5. Like she's probably a little bit more leaning towards women, and then Dracula is like, but she's like, oh, but this guy, like, but this guy. And then Alexei, totally, he's a big hedonist and he loves love and he loves people. So I think he's pretty much always known and been interested in different genders. I'm trying to remember if I made this explicit in the text, but it was my intention the whole time that Dracula's sire was a man. So I wanted, so his queerness is established like very early on. I feel like I made that explicit in the text, but I might not have said the gender.
No, you did, but I don't think that like the sire relationship was explicitly sexual. So having that distinction.
Exactly. So I think that there was like a level of seduction to that relationship, even though it wasn't very romantic. Like, I think Dracula frames it in a way of like, he was kind of kept as like a pet, basically. And like kind of made to be like a household servant essentially, and he was like, screw this, I'm killing you, I'm getting out of here. But there was that initial, I think with all sirings, there is that initial seduction because it is an intimate relationship, even if it's not if it's not explicitly sexual, there has to be some kind of the drawing in, the falling under the spell. So that is true. I think Dracula is genuinely queer, but I think that his relationship to his sexuality is so warped by predation and by the need for control. Like, ultimately at the end of the day, Dracula is like a total control freak. Like, He needs everyone to do what he wants to do. He has to be the one in control, making all the decisions, handling all the money, calling the shots, choosing where they go.
Yeah.
Just like it's like that very just like that very controlling person. So I think that does completely, I think it's a great read that it impacts his relationship with his own queerness and sexuality. And I also think more so even than being attracted to multiple genders, he's attracted to people who are vulnerable. So like all the vampires consorts that he turns in the book, like Constanza was actually dying. She was like beaten very badly and her family was dead and she's dying. Magdalena was desperate for escape because she was stuck in this society that didn't allow her to maneuver and live how she wanted to. And Alexei was dealing with a lot of poverty. So like they're all in these very vulnerable states when Dracula finds them.
Mhm.
And I think he specifically chooses people he thinks he can control. And something I wanted to explore in the book is how all of the consorts, all the brides are actually like very difficult to control. like
Yeah.
Constanza is like she has this very intense religious inner world and like this intense moral compass, and she like only kills if she wants to kill. And even though she is the victim that we see living with Dracula the longest, like she's hard to control. Magdalena, she gets sick because she has mental illness. She has bipolar, but like when she's well, she's very vivacious and outgoing, and she wants to talk to people and she'll push back against Dracula. And Alexei is just outright aggressive. Like Alexei is like, let's fight. Like you want to fight, we can fight.
Yeah.
And so I think especially with Alexei, who is the only other male like lover we see in the book, I think Dracula thought he was like getting this cute little 19-year-old 20-year-old who wasn't going to fight back, and Alexei is like one of the most belligerent consorts. Like he does
Yeah.
not accept being kept pent up and not being allowed to do what he wants to do, which I think also makes the girls a little bit more bold because they're like, well, if Alexei can get away with saying this, I can say what I think. And it spirals out of control from there, as you know if you've read the book.
Yeah. And one thing that I thought was interesting, and I'm curious to hear what you think of, like, if this relates to how Dracula controlled Constanta, Magdalena, and Alexei. He paints them as like this family. He calls them brothers and sisters, but then also wives to each other. What in the incestuous, what's going on with that choice of like them being painted as siblings?
Yeah. So that is something that has been a little controversial. It makes some people uncomfortable, which I think is totally fine and fair. Like if it squeaks you out, I'm not going to tell you that like you just need to get over it. It is kind of squicky, but I did it on purpose.
Mhm.
First of all, I think that the Gothic as a genre and vampire fiction has a lot to do with like transgressing sexual taboos. And there's a lot of like themes in the Gothic of like heavily implied like incest or families, like two families that have known each other forever, they're just very intermarried, or abuse. Like, so there's like those darker sexual undertones in a lot of early Gothic fiction that I wanted to kind of pay homage to, because I do think that they do a lot to illuminate the way we as a society don't want to see certain things. Like we don't want to see that our neighbor maybe is in an abusive relationship, or that, you know, this family has held power for 200 years through intermarriage, because we just don't want to engage with that. So on the one hand, it's kind of like in the Gothic genre, but on the other hand, I really wanted it to feel just like so claustrophobic. I wanted the relationships to feel incredibly claustrophobic, like you're my sister, you're my wife, you're my friend, like you're my only friend, you're the only person I can talk to. And I wanted that to just feel kind of oppressive and claustrophobic in the relationship they're in with Dracula, because it is like the little empire, little world that he creates is like very incestuous and unhealthy. Like they don't have contact with the outside world. They're not allowed to have friends or they can take other lovers, but only when Dracula says so. And usually when Dracula is there, he's that guy. He's that guy at the poly meetup that no.
We all know that guy.
We all know that one guy. Exactly. So it was a kind of a bold decision, but I think it's one that fits the book. And I think too, like one thing, and this kind of goes back to your earlier question about what I wanted the audience to experience when they were reading a polyamorous love story. I do love that in the end, when the brides, they go their separate ways and they come back together, then they leave and they come back together. They're kind of like each other's anchor. They're each other's like touchstone, but they also have other relationships and other friends and other lovers. So that claustrophobia is kind of broken by the end, and there's more relational breathing room. But I do think the whole like brother sister thing is something that Dracula starts and enforces. Like, I don't think that those, like, I think when Constanza is talking about Magdalena and she's like, let's be sisters, or I think Maggie says, let's be sisters, she's talking about like sisterhood, like, you know, like aligning with each other and choosing each other and being in solidarity with each other. Whereas when Dracula does it, he's more like, oh, you cute little girls, you know, over here, like making out, like it's like your sisters. And that's like gross, you know?
No, he made it creepy.
Exactly. He makes it weird.
Yeah, it's his fault. I'm also curious about kind of what was in Dracula's like lab or like workroom, because over the years he's very science obsessed and very obsessed with the transformation and what makes a vampire a vampire.
Yeah.
And then also he saves all of his letters from his past consorts. So this is kind of like a two-part question. Like, what was he discovering? And then what were his past consorts like? Do you have an image of that?
I think there's like a scene at the end where Alexi and Constanza go down to the basement into his lab and they find what they're looking for. But it's like very spooky, like, and it's not super clear what's down there. I've always just thought that it's just like kind of a murder room. Like I think he's like doing experiments on like human cadavers, basically.
Frankenstein vibes.
Yeah, exactly. Like Frankenstein vibes, bringing in that energy a little bit, like trying to figure out, like, he's very interested in anatomy and in like vampirism and like what makes a human and a vampire a vampire. I think he's been trying to figure that out for centuries.
Yeah.
It's his little pet project because everyone needs a little pet obsession to get them through being immortal. Like, you need a hobby.
Very true.
So I think that's what that was. And then I think he kind of keeps the letters the way a serial killer keeps trophies, like, because it's still a way of like holding on to them and controlling them.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I don't think he does it out of, I'm sure to him, he would say it's because I loved them. But I think genuinely, like more deep down, it's because he doesn't want to let go of these people that in most cases he ended up murdering.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like he said, none of them escaped.
Yeah, exactly. I think they all, I'm pretty sure I implied, and I intended to imply that he has killed all of them previously, because they have gotten to a point of being unruly and fighting back against him. And that is what really makes Constanza take action, because she realizes that if they stay, they will die. Which is, I think, how, like, I think people I've spoken to who have left abusive situations reach a point where even if their physical safety is not on the line, they realize that if they stay at a certain point, they're just going to be a shadow of themselves. Like, it's really a life or death decision. And I wanted to do that, but literally, like with vampires. And I think the other consorts are just as varied as in personality and in type as the consorts that are in this book. Like, I don't think he's very discriminating when it comes to gender or race or sexuality. But I do think he seeks out people who are vulnerable and who need guidance and who need saving, basically. And then he presents himself as their savior. And that's how he gets his hooks in the relationship. And I think that what I really wanted to do with Dracula that I hope comes through is I wanted to create someone who was like totally a bad guy. Like, he is awful, but he believes truly that everything he's doing is in the consort's best interest. Like, he really thinks that he's the good guy here and they're just not cooperating with him.
Yeah. And, you know, in the end, he really was the one who killed himself, because his greed and his like lust brought these three people together to unite against him, and his, you know, calling them siblings and increasing their bond for one another and increasing their love for one another through that isolation and through that like verbal naming of family. made them protective of each other against him.
Yeah.
And then his research of how to kill a vampire
It's really useful.
full for when they wanted to get the fuck out.
Exactly.
So yeah, he like wrote his own end at like with the creation of these three people. So one thing that I was wondering was if Constanta were real, would she still be alive in 2022?
Yeah.
Yes. Where do you think she would be in the world? What do you think she would be doing? And do you think she regrets immortality in any way or wants to, you know, reverse that or end her immortality in any way?
That's a great question. I think she would totally still be alive. We know at the end of the book that she really wants to go back to Romania and see Romania in spring, but I think that for her is just the start of a life traveling. So I always imagine her as kind of being a little bit nomadic, just because she really enjoyed the travel elements of being with Dracula. And as a vampire, it does make it easier for you to avoid detection if you move every once in a while. So I think she would still be traveling. And what was the end part of the question?
Do you think that she regrets immortality?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think all three of the consorts have their own way of dealing with the burden of immortality. And I do present it in A Dowry of Blood as a burden. It's something that's really hard on you psychologically. So like Magdalena's mental illness gets worse and the periods between her mania and her depression get longer because like mental illness evolves with you as you grow and change. And Alexei just tries to drown it all out with parties and with making friends and with taking lovers. And Constanza is really religious because that helps her get through it. So I think that there is a burden to living forever, but I don't think she regrets it. I think she probably does ultimately see it as a gift. And like I love another one of my favorite depictions of vampires in media is Only Lovers Left Alive. Which is this phenomenal film with Tom Hiddleston and what's her name? She's phenomenal. I forget now. But there's two vampires, one of whom is like Tilda Swinton. Yes, thank you, Veronica. Two vampires, one of whom is like very sad, moody, angsty, like humans are terrible, they're destroying the world. But Tilda Swinton's character is think of all the books that I can read, think of all the places I can travel. Like and she like gets delighted when she sees like a mushroom that's sprouting out of season. Like she just notices these little things about life that make it worth living. And I think that Constanza would have that renewed appreciation for life after escaping Dracula because her life is so much richer and so much freer now that she's not living under his thumb.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that perspective. And then, so the newly published Orbit version has the epilogue and encore from Alexei's perspective, which if you guys have the original version, it is on Saint's Substack. And
yeah, it's for free. You can get it online.
Yeah, we linked it in Geneva. So what made you want to write that from Alexei's perspective? And when did you write this in relation to the original story?
I wrote it like a year later. Like I just I think it was for the year anniversary of the publication. I wanted to do something that was a thank you to the readers and that was a way to celebrate the year publication. But I love Alexei and he's a fan favorite for a lot of people. And I also think he gets the least airtime because he's the last bride to be included. So there's less of the book that includes Alexei. And I thought it would be really lovely to show things through his perspective because I know that he went to New York at the end of the first book to become an actor. So I think I also I love the Gothic and I love horror, but I also come from romance. And like in romance, the happy ending is sacred and it's like the soft place to land at the end of very intense emotionally books, sometimes very intense emotional books. And I was just like, I thought that the ending of A Dowry of Blood is satisfactory and is happy. It's bittersweet, but I wanted like a really nice, solid, happily ever after for them. And I think you get to see that with Encore of Roses, which is the epilogue short story. It's only like 5,000 words. But it was really, really fun to write. I wrote it in like 3 days. And because I just knew exactly how it would go if they were to meet up again. And I also wanted to show that they are meeting up regularly. Like, it's not like they go their separate ways and never see each other at the end. They have separate lives, but they're always writing letters, and they're always, going to see each other and spending months and years at a time with each other. And I wanted to like make that canon.
Yeah, I love that so much. And now I'm thinking, like, if they're alive in 2022, they can just FaceTime, and it's so much easier.
Isn't it cute? It's so cute.
It would be so cute. Okay, so that concludes all of my personal questions. We're going to move into the rapid fire round. And if anyone on the call has questions for Saint, drop them in the chat. And if we have time at the end, we will definitely ask them. So what are you currently reading?
Ooh, that's great. So I'm a literary agent. So what I'm currently reading is usually unpublished books for submission. A book I just read that is out now that I loved and blurbed is House of Hunger, which you will love if you loved A Dowry of Blood. It is a sapphic retelling of the legend of Elizabeth Bathory. And it's set in this world where these aristocratic families that live in the North employ beautiful young women as blood maids to donate their blood to keep them young and beautiful.
I have this book. My best friend.
Yeah. And the cover is phenomenal. Alexis, the author, is so lovely and so smart. Yes.
Besties.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's really good. So read House of Hunger. And then I've just been reading a lot of romance, because I asked for a lot of romance before I closed my query inbox to submissions, because I'm gonna read over the winter and catch up. So I'm just reading a lot of rom-coms, and that's really nice. Like, I love a good rom-com. I love a book that's sexy and funny.
I've been on a massive rom-com kick. I discovered Abby Jimenez recently, and I'm on a tirade reading all of her work. I love that. A House of Hunger is on my like fall season list.
Yeah. If you liked A Dowry of Blood, read House of Hunger.
Love.
And it's sapphic.
What is a book that you recommend everyone to read?
Oh my God, that's a really hard question. Let me think. It's just like book recommendations are so personal, but I'm trying to think of like what is the one I'm annoying about.
The one I'm annoying about is The Argonauts by Maggie Nelson.
Yeah, it's probably going to be there's two. It's going to be either The Secret History by Donna Tartt, which like is phenomenal. It's a classic for a reason. I'm like so obsessed with it. I was really big into Dark Academia in college, like back before the Dark Academia boom. And that was like my book I carried around with me. So I recommend that one. And then there's a really good spicy romance by Sierra Simone called Saint. So it's my name, which always makes me happy. But it is about it's a queer romance between two men, one of whom is a monk. Yes. And so it's a monk who teams up with his journalist ex-boyfriend to go on a tour of a bunch of European monasteries, and they fall back in love during that tour. And it's all about like, what do we owe to God? What do we owe to each other? And it's also about mental illness and like recovering from mental illness. It's amazing. And it's spicy. It's very spicy.
My religious trauma is going to love this. I'm so excited.
You're going to have a field day. It's going to light up all the little connections in your brain.
Obsessed. Okay, I'm ordering that immediately.
Yeah.
Did you take up a unusual quarantine activity?
Embroidery.
Oh, I love that. My mom did too.
Yeah, my grandma taught me to embroider when I was little, and I took it back up again when the quarantine happened. So I was embroidering a lot when I was writing A Dowry of Blood. Actually, I would go rest my eyes after typing by just like mindlessly embroidering.
I love that. If you could have dinner with anyone dead or alive, who would it be?
I'm very fortunate in that I've actually met a lot of my like heroes literarily, and they've been very nice to me. I'm trying to think. I love Anais Nin. She's my problematic fave. She's like, I love her so much, and I love her diaries.
I feel like Alexi would fuck her in the 20s.
Totally, that's canon.
That is so canon.
100%. So I would love to be able to meet her and just like listen to her talk over like wine and some cheese.
Yeah, no, Alexi is in a Delta of Venus, obviously.
Absolutely.
What is the favorite class you took at university?
It was a class on Oceanic Literature. It was like the one that surprised me the most. And it was this awesome class where we just read all kinds of poetry and novels from like Guam and Samoa and Hawaii and like all of these wonderful places in Oceania that I didn't know anything about. And I read some really good stuff, and it was just like very mind expanding. And the class just had great discussion. It was only like 10 of us. And the teacher was phenomenal. So that always sticks out as one of my favorites from undergrad, as like a class was kind of a surprise.
I love that. Favorite spooky season movie to watch to get in the spooky season mood?
I love Over the Garden Wall, which is it's like a mini series from Cartoon Network, but if you watch it back to back, it's like 2 hours long, and it's animated and it's really lovely, and it's like based on Dante's Inferno, weirdly, and it's just like the vibes are impeccable. The vibes are so good.
Love it.
I just watched it. My like a group of my close friends and I carved pumpkins, and we watched it like last week.
That is so cute. That's like a perfect October moment. Okay, so vampire related questions.
All right, let's go.
What is your vampire movie or TV show? Like, what is yours?
Van Helsing 2004. I watch it like multiple times a year, and I'll be like, and I love, my fiance is so great, but he doesn't really like it that much. It's not his favorite. So I'll be like, I'm gonna watch Van Helsing on the big screen, and he's like, okay, have fun. I'll make you some popcorn. Like, enjoy.
That's so cute. And then do you have a favorite vampire book besides A Dowry of Blood?
Probably Anne Rice. It's hard to choose which of the Vampire Chronicles, but that was so influential on me. My mother loves her too, and we like bonded over that when I was in high school. So probably just like Interview with a Vampire, or one of the Lestat books.
I watched Interview with a Vampire for the first time earlier this year, and I did not realize how campy and gay it was. It's so
campy and gay.
I love it.
She paved the way for us.
And Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, excuse me? I'm like, how does this movie exist?
It's like the casting for that movie is something that if like you told me the casting, I would be like, well, that's a bad idea. And then you watch the movie and you're like, this is actually perfect.
This is the greatest movie ever made.
Yeah.
It's like if Top Gun was vampires. It's just homoerotic tension is palpable. Okay, Team Edward or Team Jacob?
I always thought Carlisle was pretty hot.
That's a right answer. It's like which of the zaddies? Is it Carlisle or is it what's it, Charlie?
Exactly. No, it's Carlisle. I'm a Carlisle girly.
Carlisle.
There's that scene where he's like Bella is injured and he's like,
they have more chemistry than her and Robert.
Yeah, he's like being a doctor and like talking all soft, and it's like big daddy energy, and I'm like, this is what I'm going for.
That's the polycule. They're all really just fucking okay, favorite sapphic celebrity?
Ooh, right now it's probably, I don't know if they're sapphic actually. I'm very into Emma Darcy right now because I'm a House of the Dragon girly.
Yeah.
And I know that they're non-binary and they give me big sapphic energy, but I can't actually confirm that. It looks like in the chat people are saying yes, that is true.
So have you had a Negroni Sbagliato
with Prosecco in it?
There are going to be so many Halloween costumes of Negroni Sbagliatos. I swear to God.
I almost, like, after that came out, I almost ordered a Negroni at the bar, and I was like, I can't do it. I have to wait until like they actually have like the ingredients back behind the bar.
No, I went on a date and I was like, I think I'm the 1,000th bisexual this week to ask this, but may I please have a Negroni Sbagliato? And the waitress was like, yes, you can. I was like, thank you. But do you have, okay, last rapid fire question. Do you have like a favorite sapphic content creator or someone to follow on social media that you think everyone should be following?
Oh my gosh, that's so great. I'm like, I think this is my problem is I default assume that everyone is bisexual because I'm bisexual, and it's a problem. Like,
you're until proven straight.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'm trying to imagine, I think right now, again, I'm almost positive that I think probably Khadija Embo. She does video essays. She's really lovely. She has essays about like culture and art and politics and all kinds of stuff. and she just has like great energy, and I like put her on in the background. I like watch all her videos, and
I
I'm
love-
fairly positive she's dating a woman right now. And she talks a lot about like she like will talk a lot about like learning how to love better, and like open versus closed relationships, and like she's just this very
Sounds
thoughtful,
pretty gay to me.
yeah, thoughtful, lovely energy. She reads a lot of bell hooks, you know.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, she's really wonderful. I love I'm here for the girls and the gays, but I default assume that everyone is bi until proven otherwise. So I'm like, let me not slander somebody on the internet, but
I mean,
I'm pretty sure I'm right.
I love that. Okay, so we have 2 questions in the chat so far, and if anyone else has some questions, we have about 4 minutes. So Constanta is a place in Romania. Is that what inspired her name?
I didn't know that until later. I just chose something that was like steadfast, constant. I was like, Constanta, yeah, that sounds good. That sounds Romanian-ish. And then I looked it up and I was like, it is a place in Romania. So that is confirmed that this is a real name that existed in the region. That'll work.
I love that. And then why is she a redhead?
So actually there's a meaning behind the hair colors, because in a lot of Dracula depictions, and this comes to us from the earliest Dracula film adaptations, the brides were always a brunette, a redhead, and a blonde. So that is why the consorts are a brunette, a redhead, and a blonde.
Oh, I love that. He's like, let me collect one of each. Get him like Pokemon.
Literally, exactly. He's the best review I ever saw for Diary of Blood. I don't read my reviews, but like I'll see them sometimes if I go on Goodreads to like pull data.
Yeah.
And the best review I ever saw was just Dracula was collecting those bisexuals like Pokemon. That was the whole review.
That needs to be on the cover.
I know.
Republish it now. Well, that is everything that we had. Saint, thank you so much for chatting with me.
Welcome.
This was
Thank you for
such a
coming. And this
joy.
is my little gift to you. This is my cat. He's been here the whole time.
What's their name?
This is Pigeon.
Baby. No, that is such a gift. It was such a pleasure getting to know you and getting to chat. I had
Thank
so
you
much
for bringing
fun.
me on. This was so great. You guys are wonderful. These are some of the best questions I've been asked about this book. So thank you very much.
Oh, that means more to me than you'll ever know. Well, we will keep in touch and cannot wait to see what you're doing next.
Thank you
And
so much.
have a wonderful rest of your weekend.
Thank you. You too, guys. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah.